Hopefully you don't ask me any quantum physics questions.
I got some pretty graphics questions.
Calculus, so you're like...
Okay, Ty, go ahead. We're ready.
My name is Ty Winker. I'm here at Ball State University. The date is November 8th. We are interviewing Major John Morrow on his military service and life. How are you doing today, Major?
Yeah, pretty good, Ty. It's good to be here. It's great, just like I said, I mean, I know I'm repeating myself, but this is the first time for the camera. The red carpet welcome was just more than we definitely probably deserved and definitely expected, but we definitely appreciated that.
It's our way of thanking you for your service.
Oh, yeah, no, thanks. Thank you.
Could you please spell your name and give your date of birth?
Yeah, it's John, John, first name, and Morrow, Morrow, last name, 15 May 1974.
Okay, and where were you born?
Yeah, Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay.
So.
And how was growing up in Kansas City, Missouri?
Yeah, well, I lived just southeast of Kansas City. As a farm. It's called Kingsville, Missouri. So it's about 45 minutes to an hour. We always say we're an hour from Kansas City. But I loved it. It's a small rural area. My parents' farm's probably, their nearest neighbor is really like almost a mile away. So it was nice, peaceful, quiet, tranquil. And I loved it. I love growing up in a small rural community. That's what I really enjoyed. Always longed to go back to my parents' farm. Being at Fort Leonard Wood, my parents are less than 3 hours away. So now that I have two small boys, whenever we get a long weekend, we get in the van, drive up to the farm, stay at my parents' farm. It's nice. My boys love it too. And it brings back good memories. I had a lot of good memories growing up. My parents were just absolutely fantastic people.
Do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I have a 3-year-old older sister and then a 3-year younger brother. My sister lives in Iowa, and my brother lives in Overland Park, Kansas.
Neither of them were in the military?
Yeah, they were never in the military. Definitely, I guess I was the black sheep of the family. My father served, my uncle served, grandfather served, but my brother's not apt for the military, and neither my sister. My sister has some physical problems that she probably couldn't have joined even if she wanted to, but my brother's demeanor is not... It's not conducive to being in the military. He was smart enough to realize he's an incredibly intelligent man. So, but
why do you feel that of the three of you? Well, you mentioned your sister had the physical ailments, but why do you think between you and your brother, you were the one that made it to the military? Was it your father prompting? Or?
Well, no, my father. He never. My parents are very patriotic, but they didn't promote the military as military service. But ever since I was a young child, I always just really liked and enamored with the military. It's just one of those things that a warrant officer asked me one time when I was a young lieutenant. He said, "Sir, why did you join?" And I was like, "Chief, I don't know. I always just wanted to join the military." He's like, "Yeah, but you have to have a reason." And I'm like, "I don't think I actually have. It's just something that's in your heart." Ever since I was a young child, I just was enamored with the military. And then as I go into high school, I was able to actually fully think about it, becoming a young adult. And then I just always wanted to be in the military. My brother was kind of a polar opposite as far as he didn't want anything to do with the military. It was funny when the military recruiters called him for the first time when he was like a junior in high school. And because, it's just funny because it's amazing you grow up in the same environment, the same parents, the same loving, caring upbringing, and yet one person is totally different when it comes to certain choices in life. I don't know, it's strange. It's one of those heredity versus environment type things.
How did your parents react when you joined, when you signed up for ROTC at UC?
Oh, no, they were very supportive. Yeah, my parents are they're very proud. One of my grandmothers on my mother's side is still alive. She's the only grandparent left. But all my family members have been very supportive, and my brother and sister, but especially my parents. They're very patriotic. Especially now, my wife's in the military as well. She's part of the family. She's like their second daughter, I guess, so to speak. They love her. But they're very supportive. All my extended family is very supportive. My in-laws, my wife's family, obviously, very supportive. Her father, deceased, but he's a retired Navy veteran, Pearl Harbor survivor, for example. But they're very supportive as well. So.
How was your college life being a member of ROTC and having to get up early on the weekends?
Yeah, luckily we didn't do a whole lot of stuff on the weekends, but we did. We did the physical training in the morning, which it's interesting talking to ROTC Ball State kids. They're like, "Oh, we're going to PT 4 days a week. It's a big deal." I think we did it like every day. It seems maybe it seems like it was every day, but it's tough. It was juggling a lot of different commitments because you're doing physical training in the morning. Like in the Army, basically it's 6:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock sometimes. And then you have class all day and homework all day. So it was competing concerns. I mean, it was difficult at times because I had a lot of commitments, especially my junior and senior year, being in the ROTC and then also doing classes. I was an aviation aerodynamics major, for example. So it's a lot of science and math related classes, although I loved those classes, but it was tough. I mean, it was a pretty big workload. And then we also would do training every now and then on the weekends, but we do them once or twice a week in the local area. It's a lot of preparation for those. You don't just jump into a training event. You have to prepare it and lay out situational training lanes and all that. We would go to the ranges, but it all takes the preparation. It's like studying for a test. It takes several hours. The test might be an hour, but it takes several hours of prep for that.
And when you graduated in '96, you would have gone into advanced training after that, correct?
Yeah, for us, once you get commissioned and you become a second lieutenant, then you go, and it's still called that, it's officer basic course. It's different now the way they break up the different phases. But for me, it was down at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, for the engineer officer basic courses. I'm an engineer officer. And then after that, I went to airborne school, and then I went to Germany as my first duty station. But officer basic course, like I said, it's changed. It was 15 years ago. Now it's not as long, but it's a different phase. I think back then, it was about 18 weeks, if I remember correctly. It's basically all summer long. I showed up, class started, I think, the early part of June, and it was basically all summer long. But we did a lot of good training. It's a lot of class. For the engineers, there's a lot of class work. You also did field training exercises and stuff at the end. Pretty good. It's kind of a capstone type event right before you become like a platoon leader for your first duty station.
And was that your first choice?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, as an engineer officer. Actually, I had my heart set on being a pilot, but I was nearsighted. I've had corrective vision done, but at the time I was nearsighted, so I couldn't pass my medical flight physical, even though I was a civilian pilot. I could be a civilian pilot, I could fly for hire as a commercial rated pilot, but I couldn't fly in the military. So I really wanted to be a helicopter pilot, and I really actually wanted to go in the Air Force, but I knew I couldn't pass the flight physical for the Air Force. But I did have hopes at the time, at least like when I was a freshman and sophomore in college, of being a helicopter pilot, but no dice. And not that engineers were like, oh, I guess I'll be an engineer, because that's been a fantastic job, and I'm in hindsight, I think it's probably the best choice. I definitely wouldn't have met my wife now if I hadn't taken that choice. I mean, no telling where I'd be at right now if I'd become a helicopter pilot in the Army. So in hindsight, looking in hindsight, that was definitely the best choice. So
tell me a little bit about Germany. That was your first assignment.
Yes.
After AT.
Yeah, that was good. I got there, I guess it was right after New Year's 1997, so January 97. And that was another choice. I mean, I had my heart set on going active duty. For us, it was regular Army commission, so as opposed to getting a National Guard or Army Reserve commission. And I wanted to be an engineer, and I wanted to go to Germany. So I got all three of the things I wanted. And then I went to the 94th Engineer Battalion in Germany at that time. It's in Vilseck. Battalion headquarters is in Vilseck, Germany. Company in Hohenfels, Germany, company in Grafenwehr, Germany. It's actually ironic. I just came from the 94th as a battalion S3 at XO. They moved to Fort Leonard Wood. So that was my old battalion. I came back to be the battalion as a major of the battalion S3 and XO. But I went there, the battalion had just spent a year in Bosnia, Christmas of 95 to Christmas of 96. So they had just redeployed from Bosnia, so it was a lot of chaos. I mean, at that time, 1 year deployments were unheard of. The Army never deployed really for 12 months. So everybody had just come back, and it was like chaos. I mean, I'm the new guy, I'm green, everybody else are veteran. Been a year in Bosnia. Back then, that was the big event. Now it looks like children's play almost with Iraq and now Afghanistan. But it was great. I went to Bravo Company. I was actually a vertical platoon leader, 2nd Platoon Bravo Company, which vertical construction is carpenters, electricians, plumbers, those folks, masons, specialists, putting concrete masonry block and stuff like that. So that was my first platoon. It's a construction battalion. That's essentially what it is. But it's actually fantastic. I did that, excuse me, for about 8 or 9 months, and then I deployed to Macedonia. That's actually when I worked with, at the time it was 126 Infantry, 2nd Brigade Combat Team. It was actually, at the time, it was Lieutenant Colonel Dragon, and then he came back eventually as Brigadier General Dragon as a Deputy Commanding General for Support, I believe. Or, yeah, Deputy Commanding General for Support. He just left First Infantry Division recently. But I deployed that, and I was there working with the UN headquarters for 7 months. Back then, back in the 90s, there's a UN mission and the U.S. supported. It was really about the only UN mission that the U.S. supported with actual troops, soldiers on the ground as opposed to observers. But that was in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
You were doing the similar vertical construction that you were in Germany?
I was an engineer advisor at the UN headquarters in Skopje, which is the capital of Macedonia, and there was an engineer platoon, American engineer platoon. At that time, it was out of the Missouri National Guard, but usually the 94th Engineer Battalion actually had supported each rotation with a platoon. Some horizontal construction folks, which are heavy equipment operators, and then the vertical construction folks.
And at the time, you were still a second lieutenant?
Yes. Yeah, I went there, which was a little bit odd because I was technically the engineer advisor that worked at the UN headquarters. So when I showed up as a second lieutenant, they're like, well, it was a captain's position. So just like anything, the Army's big on rank. So if you're a captain position and you show up as a second lieutenant, some eyes, the eyebrows kind of go up and they say, hey, are you too junior for this job? And it was a tough job. It was a very rewarding job. We worked at half the the force was actually essentially U.S. battalion. It was originally 1/6 Infantry, and then it was replaced by 126 Infantry, 1st Infantry. But the other half of the force were a mixture. It was a Finnish battalion from Finland, and they had a company from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. So they call it Nordkoi. They didn't make up a whole lot. The 4 Nordic countries provided the other half of the force. It was one of those things that is the best kept secret in the Army. For that supporting that rotation, and not a whole lot of folks don't know anything about that because that was the mission going on while Bosnia was going on. Bosnia got basically all the credit or all the press a lot of times because it's a UN peacekeeping mission, and that mission went on until the Kosovo campaign really kicked off, and then that was when. I believe it was when Taiwan recognized Macedonia as an actual nation. That's when China actually pulled the funding for that UN mission and went away, which is actually a shame. That happened all in the 99, I guess. So
you were in Macedonia, or you were in Germany first, and then Macedonia from 97 till.
Yeah, it was like September 97. I served about 7 months. I came back about April 98. And halfway through, about 4 months, it was actually with the 1st Infantry, 2nd Brigade. It was 126 Infantry, 2nd Brigade, 1st Infantry Division. And then came back to Germany, got a 2nd Platoon, which was a horizontal type platoon doing earth-moving operations, and did that probably for the next several months. Then became a Company XO down in Alpha Company, 94th Engineer Battalion. Back then, it was lettered companies. Now they're numerical companies. Down in Hohenfels, and then deployed to Kosovo. We actually went to Albania first. That was like May of 99. Went to Albania for a couple months and then went up to Kosovo the summer of 99. We were part of the first force that went to Kosovo, and that was actually, we fell under the 1st Infantry Division Engineer Brigade at the time when they still had an Engineer Brigade. It was Task Force, at that time they called it Task Force Hawk. Or Task Force Falcon, excuse me. But that was actually by Brigadier General Craddock at the time. He eventually came back to be the 1st Infantry Division commander and then went to Southcom as a combatant commander, and he's now retired. But he was a 1-star. He was the Deputy Commanding General for 1st Infantry Division. At the time, it was under General Grange. General Grange was the 1st Infantry Division commander, and then he was replaced by General Abizaid. So there's a lot of, it's interesting looking back on all the folks that became combatant commanders, and everybody still hears about General Grange. Obviously, he retired officially as a brigadier general, but we fell under that. That's really who led the charge in Kosovo in '99 was the 1st Infantry Division. So we fell under, our entire battalion was deployed to Kosovo and fell underneath them. So we officially was under the 1st Infantry Division Engineer Brigade.
How was your deployment in Kosovo? Can you describe some of the more
Oh yeah,
affecting or more dramatic effects of your
Oh,
deployment? Or
yeah, that was one of those things. And being in Iraq and seeing all the construction, but Kosovo, because it was, it's amazing. It's kind of like before Christ and AD. I mean, for folks in the Army, and it's for like me, and it's always going to be like me. It's before 9/11 and after 9/11. I mean, it is. It's unique because it's BC or AD. I mean, for us, it's really if you were in the Army before 9/11, you make that mental switch of, okay, everything was on this side of 9/11, and that's my memories, and then obviously everything post 9/11. But something before 9/11, it was great stuff. I mean, we were one of the first. My crew was one of the first ones into Kosovo, and for us, we spent almost all of our time at Camp Bondsteel, what would become Camp Bondsteel. And when we got there, it was amazing. They had just signed the peace agreement, so the bombs had stopped falling. The Serb troops were still pulling out of Kosovo. I mean, when we rolled in there were still Serbs and tractors and wagons looking very angrily, and probably rightfully so. You have to look at it from their perspective. Still moving north to exit Kosovo. And I remember getting to camp, what would become Camp Bondsteel, and it was just this beautiful hilltop with tall grass. And that's all it was there. It was just, and a few tents. There was like an infantry battalion that had just kind of set up security. But over the next several months, and we left right before Thanksgiving in '99, I mean, we took that, I mean, it was us. It was Brown and Root on the civilian contractors, and then the 94th Engineer Battalion. I mean, we took that place and made a big base camp, a huge base camp with an airfield and everything. I mean, it was 24/7 construction. We had day shift, night shift constantly for several months, moving just hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of dirt, of earth, building countless numbers of sea huts and tent pads, and just, I mean, it's amazing. It was a construction dream. That's why I always tell people. I was like, and some of the veterans, and some of them come back to the 94th, including like a couple soldiers that were, as a platoon leader, I was leading them as a platoon leader, and now they're back as like a first sergeant in the same battalion. And we run into each other, and now he's a first sergeant Barkeveld, and he was PV2 Barkeveld when I was second lieutenant Morrow. And so we always talk to each other like, hey, Top, you remember these days in Kosovo? But it was great. I mean, we built a lot of stuff, and then our capstone, the last project we built as a battalion, I'm sure it's still there. It's cool. We put the Big Red 1 patch on a large parking lot. So from the overview, yeah, we used treated timbers to do the outline of the Big Red 1, and then we used colored rock, brown and red, actually white and black, because that's all we could get. So the one was actually black, and then everything around it was white rock. So it was this huge Big Red 1 patch in Camp Bondsteel, Kosovo. That was the last project we did as a battalion. It was actually my company. I was in Company XO for Alpha 94th. And that was the last project that the battalion did, and obviously our company did. So we kind of put the stamp, because, I mean, that was General, at the time, he was Brigadier General Craddock, but that's what he wanted before we left the AO. He wanted to put the Big Red 1, because that unit that brigade and that division headquarters minus was getting ready to rotate out. And I think they were turning over to the 1st Armored Division. So, they wanted to put the Big Red 1 stamp on it. And it was cool. I mean, I saw the picture once we got it built, and they took a helicopter shot on it, and it looked awesome. I was like, hey, that's pretty cool. I mean, it looked almost like somebody had photoshopped it into the photo. It looked great. So
something like, putting your mark like that as the 1st Infantry Division, once you joined the 1ID, you were ingrained and you were instructed on the history. How did it feel to become part of, basically one of the 1st Infantry Divisions in the Army?
Oh, yeah, no, it was great. And up to that time, because we weren't at Vilseck, it's kind of weird. The Army's changed so much now. Now you have 2nd Stryker Brigade at Vilseck, Germany, but at the time you had 3rd Brigade, 1st Infantry Division, the Iron Brigade. And they had deployed to Bosnia, and they were supposed to be part of the force going in Kosovo, but I think there's a hiccup with their training, so that's why they sent 2nd Brigade, 1st Infantry to Kosovo at the time. So we had a lot of lineage. I'd worked a lot with 3rd Brigade just because you're geographically there, and actually for UCMJ it actually went through they were the brigade headquarters that UCMJ went through because you're geographically located, or geographically co-located. But so we had a little bit, you saw all the first ID patches on. We wore a different patch. We were under the 130th Engineer Brigade, so we had our separate patch. I mean, kind of like now we have the 4th MEB. We have our own separate patch. But we worked a lot with 3rd Brigade doing rotations and stuff. But I think going to Kosovo definitely sealed it because, again, that was a 1st Infantry Division command when we were in Kosovo. I mean, you had General Craddock as the brigadier general that was in charge of it was a division minus. I guess they probably call it the division TAC, probably forward, or first ID forward. I mean, they had to do a composite kind of command headquarters. But it was nice, being under the lineage of the first. I mean, and Colonel McClure at the time was the 1st Infantry Division Engineer Brigade commander at the time. And we did OPDs, and he thanked us because we left before he did. And he said, hey, you are part of our brigade. Now Colonel McCoy, now Major General McCoy, I think he just retired. He was our 130th Engineer Brigade commander. He may not have liked that because, we had our actual 5th Corps lineage at that time. But, it was nice that we were deployed with 1st Infantry Division. They said, hey, you're part of us. We don't wear the same patch, but you were part of the first team while you were here in Kosovo. And that was nice. I mean, that was nice. I mean, I still remember that. Colonel McClure, I know, is long retired, and I don't even think he made general officer. But I always remember that when we were getting ready to leave, and he told us that was nice. So
you, when did you make it back home from the peacekeeping mission in the Balkans?
Yeah. We left right before Thanksgiving of '99. So it was like we flew back on the first week of November, I think it was. So
up to that point, you were at UCM. You were an hour away from home, and at your training, you were 3 hours away from home. How did your family adapt to being? Oh yeah,
in Germany or in deployed
in a combat area in Kosovo.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because going to Kosovo at the time, we were going to Albania, and some of us, I was the company adjutant, so we ended up in Albania. But I didn't even have time to call my parents because we got alerted on the weekend, and I was gone that next Friday. It was a nightmare. Just 5-6 days of just throwing everything together to get on the plane. At the time, we flew down to Albania. So when I got to Albania, I called. I finally found a phone center. Back then, I mean, telecommunications is getting a lot better now. I mean, that was only 15, 14 years ago. It's amazing how much has changed. But finally, we found some weird phone that we could finally dial, and I called my mom. I was like, I'm in Albania now. And I mean, I was like, I'm sorry, I really didn't even have time to call you before we left. It was a nightmare trying to rush out in 5-6 days. It was very difficult. So obviously that was a little odd, and I said, hey, here's my mailing address, send me some stuff, because it was a little austere. But yeah, back then, I mean, you didn't have the phone connectivity like you do now. So a lot of it was still via snail mail. Like I said, it was amazing. It was only 14 years ago, but.
So you had limited contact with home?
Yeah, just minus them sending me a care package every couple of weeks. And they had done that when I was in Macedonia, but that was a steady state operation. It was better phone connectivity and stuff like that, and regular mail service and stuff like that. But Kosovo, because Kosovo was a contingency operation. Well, Albania then became Kosovo. Was a contingency operation, so it was a little bit discombobulated, kind of like OIF 1 kicking off. I mean, it's the initial push in there. You don't have all those support services and all the comfortable DFACs and AFES facilities and all that stuff. I mean, you don't have it because you're the initial force that's going in there. So there's nothing. Like I said, when we got there was nothing but beautiful grass hilltop. With a couple tents on it, and then it just grew and grew and grew. So that was pretty nice being part of the first folks that went into Kosovo. So I wasn't part of the OIF 1 crew going in 2003, obviously, but I'm sure that's probably what the same thing they felt. I mean, they were the first ones going in Iraq. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, you're the front of the formation moving in, and you set up everything for the first time. I'm sure that's probably what the OIF 1 veterans probably felt, because that's why I felt as going into Kosovo. We were the first crew going in there. There was nothing there. We set up everything and built everything from really nothing.
It's been the 1ID's moniker as being the first in Or except for Korea.
Oh yeah.
They were in charge of Germany. But
But
so
yeah.
was that part of like a sense of pride almost for being?
Yeah, it probably was. I mean, and like I said, we were kind of part of the first ID team at that time, and especially looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, that was actually pretty cool stuff. Because obviously, I mean, their heritage of World War I and then World War II, what they did, especially on D-Day at Normandy and stuff, and then obviously for OIF-1 as well. Being part of the first crew going into Iraq. So I mean, I'm sure that's kind of the moniker that they like to live up to. So.
You mentioned earlier that had it not been for your engineering assignment and training, you wouldn't have met your wife. Did you meet her while you were deployed to Germany and Macedonia, or did you?
No, I was a company commander at Fort Riley, Kansas. Well, actually, I was getting ready to take command at Fort Riley. I was still on the brigade level staff, the group staff, and it was the 3 Corps warfighters right after 9/11, unfortunately. But she was in the 1st Cav Engineer Brigade, and then we just bumped into each other. And I mean, it's kind of weird. It's actually one of my good family friends who was a chemical officer in my group headquarters. We worked right next to each other. She became quasi friends with my wife, Simlin. And then she introduced us at the time. When we were at Fort Hood, we spent a lot of time at Fort Hood supporting 1st Cavalry Division and the 3rd Corps, 3 Corps, for the war fighters and stuff like that right after 9/11.
Were you both the same rank, or?
Yeah, we were both captains. She's like a few months ahead, so she just got promoted to Lieutenant Colonel last week. So she outranks me for the next several months, and trust me, she'll. Just like as a major, I mean, she got promoted to major for several months. She was a major for several months before I got promoted to major. We're both year group 95 folks now, but she's an early commissionee, and the way my promotion worked, so we're a few months behind. I'm a few months behind her. So yeah, she didn't outrank me at the time, but since she's my better half, she always outranks me regardless. I learned that as she's the boss, and my father gave me that wise advice. Yeah, it's very easy. Women don't forget. Yeah. It's easy.
So after you met your wife around 9/11, and you mentioned earlier that the Army is very much pre-9/11, 9/11, and post-9/11. Can you describe? Everybody remembers where they were. Can you describe where you were and your feelings?
Yeah, I was in the 937th Engineer Group, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. It was one of the units that was deactivated in 2000, I guess 4 or 5. Part of the transformation of the Army, they deactivated several units. But it was a brigade level headquarters. It was commanded by Engineer Colonel 06. So it's essentially as a brigade. I mean, it's confusing. A lot of folks in the Army don't remember the groups, but an engineer group was essentially like an engineer brigade, technically, as far as for discussion purposes. But I worked in the S3 shop when I was the S3 planner. So I did all the planning and the plans orders, operations orders for exercises and operations. But my additional duty was I was the force protection officer for the group, and which up to that point you do annual force protection exercises, but it was kind of like check the block. But obviously on 9/11 we didn't realize obviously how serious that was. But I was actually at Fort Riley. I just finished. I was eating at the chow hall. I didn't do PT that morning because my another additional duty. I had a lot of hats. So I was the plans officer. I was the force protection officer, and I was also the force modernization officer. That's when the Army fields new equipment. There's a plan, hey, here's this new vehicle that's getting implemented, and eventually it's phased into the various units. But you synchronize that as a force mod officer. But I had a force modernization meeting that morning, so I didn't do physical training that morning. I came in early. I ate ate breakfast at the chow hall, and I remember almost finishing my breakfast, and I said breaking news, and they showed the World Trade Center, one of the first building hit, burning, and it's like breaking news. And I think at the time it was like ABC, Good Morning America. I think it said aircraft accident hit the building, and it was a beautiful sunny day because they had the picture of it actually burning. I was like, well, I'm a civilian pilot, just small aircraft, but I was like, that's insane. I was like, it's a beautiful sunny day. How the hell could plane hit the building, because it had just happened, obviously, and I was like, wow, that's terrible. And then I left and I went to the force mod meeting, but we were hashing out a lot of stuff, and back then there wasn't a whole lot of cell phones, and the ones that did, it's like, turn your cell phone off, we're in this meeting, and probably down there at Camp Funston, I don't think you'd get reception anyway. So we were down there for about 2 hours. We didn't know what was going on. Then we left, and I'm driving up the hill, and MP cars are blaring, and I pull into group headquarters, and they were fast. I mean, I granted to, they were fast. They were already putting up concertina wire, the wire, the barbed wire stuff. They were already putting it around the brigade or the group headquarters. I mean, I didn't know what the hell was going on, and I walked in there. I was like, what the hell's going on? And they said, haven't you heard? I was like, no, I've been in a meeting for the last 2 hours. I'm like, heard what? And they're like, World Trade Center. I was like, yeah, I saw that there was a plane that crashed into one of the buildings, and they said, no, it's an attack. The Pentagon's been hit. The second building of the World Trade Center's been hit. I'm like, I was in shock, because I was kind of in that I was completely disconnected from reality for 2 hours while all this stuff was unfolding. So, to me, I was just totally shocked. And that was a very long day at Fort Riley, unfortunately.
After the initial shock wore off, what were your feelings of potential war?
Yeah, for me, and it really messed me up for a few weeks. For me, it was a completely surreal environment. I couldn't fathom, especially being an engineer and loving construction. I love architecture. I love big buildings, and I'm enamored with, and seeing the World Trade Center just in a rubble pile. I couldn't believe it. For me, I couldn't believe that was reality. I just could not believe it. Because the next several days, because they were incredibly long days, especially the very first day. I finally went home around midnight, just because I said, hey, I didn't do PT this morning, so I don't even have my shower gear. I don't have personal hygiene gear. Normally I'd come in, I'd shower at the gym, and I'd have my gym bag with me with my person. I was like, heck, I'll stay here tonight, the night on 9/11. But I was like, I don't have anything. I have nothing. I at least have to go home and get my stuff. But I didn't go home until like midnight or 1 in the morning, and just as soon as I went home, I had like 5 messages on my answering machine. I didn't have a cell phone at that time, but I had like 5 or 6 messages on my answering machine from like my mother, my sister. I think one of my uncles called me. My grandmother called me. Because they don't understand. They're just like, okay, John's in the military, John's in the Army. But so I listened to all these messages, and they're like, oh, we're just asking to see what's going on. It's one of those things like the civilians don't know. They just say, oh, well, if you're in the Army, you probably know what's going on, right? No, we're completely confused too. But yeah, I just remember for the next probably a few weeks, I was just completely, it was completely surreal. I just couldn't fathom what happened on 9/11. I would just, over the next couple of days after 9/11, as they started finally piecing the hijackers together, and obviously the bin Laden stuff came out, I still just couldn't believe it. I'm like, how in the heck did they do what they did? So for me, I was just completely, I was really in shock. I really was. I was in shock, and those first few days after 9/11, you had the price gouging. The gas went through the roof in certain places. They were going like $4 or $5 a gallon. It was absurd. So I know for the first few days after 9/11, people were really paranoid. That's what I remember, especially at Fort Riley. Obviously, most Army posts weren't closed at that time. They didn't have a gate. You could just drive onto any Army post willy-nilly, back and forth all you wanted. Obviously, on 9/11, they immediately closed them. You had gate guards from then on out. So the traffic was horrible like the next several weeks, until people got the battle rhythm down on how to properly bring in the traffic. But yeah, that was horrible. I remember exactly, like I said, vividly, exactly what I was doing step by step. And like I said, driving up the hill from Camp Funston's on the lower part of Fort Riley, and where we worked is called Custer Hill. It's on a bluff. It's the high part of Fort Riley. But yeah, driving from Camp Funston, where the railhead's at, I still remember that like I'm watching a movie, just driving up that hill and seeing the MP cars, and not knowing at the time what the heck was going on. And then it was just a surreal. It's like waking up from a dream and seeing a reality that you weren't used to before you went to sleep. That's kind of how it was. But yeah, that was terrible. I remember those days especially the day of 9/11, those specific events where I was at. Like it was yesterday. I mean, they're frozen in my mind forever. So.
And at the time, you'd already been in 5 years. Were you already planning on a career in the military, going all the way to 20, or did that affect you re-upping a third time?
Well, at that time, because I had contemplated getting out from Germany. At the time, I wanted to go back and work with my father in construction. So, at the time I was in Germany, we were in Kosovo, and I had to make a decision when we were deployed to Kosovo to go to the advanced course. Now they call it the Captain's Career Course. So it's like, well, I don't know. I don't know if I want to serve you, because at that time I think I only had a 3-year commitment because I was non-scholarship ROTC. So I was like, I don't know. I think I want to go back to the States. But at that time, I wasn't sure. My company commander at the time, he's Colonel Everett Spain, absolutely probably one of the most honorable men I've ever met in my life. He kind of talked me into going to the advanced course. Because I said, well, sir, I'm thinking of getting out. And he's like, give it a shot. If you don't like it, get out, go to the advanced course, go do 1 or 2 years. If you don't like it, but at least give that, to yourself. So I decided to go to the advanced course, and I was like, even in the advanced course, now the Captain's Career Course, I said, well, I'm still not sure if I really want to stay in. I did the Missouri S&T graduate program. Now it's the Missouri S&T. At the time it was University of Missouri in Rolla. So you get a graduate degree. So it's a pretty good deal being at least an engineer officer. But I was like, I'm not sure if I want to stay in. So that was one of the reasons I picked Fort Riley, because it's close to Kansas City. And I was thinking about that time. I was like, you know what? Yeah, you at least had a 1-year commitment. It's called the ADSO. Once they moved you have to serve at least 1 year. So I was like, well, I'll go to Riley. I'll give it a shot. The 9/11 happened, and it wasn't. I mean, at that time, I was kind of enjoying my job. They'd already plugged me in and said, hey, you're going to take over the 568 CSC, which is a horizontal construction type company at the time. So I was like, okay, that's cool. I mean, so it kind of just incrementally kind of just locked me in. Then obviously I met my wife right after 9/11, well, soon-to-be wife, future wife at the time, who would become my future wife at the time, right after 9/11. And then after that, it was just kind of, I took command and then just kind of locked me in. But I don't know. I don't think 9/11 kept me in. I probably, I mean, looking back on it, I probably had already made the decision really to stay in right, before 9/11 it kicked off. Because I got to Riley, I got settled, kind of found my rhythm and said, I'm going to serve more than 1 year. I kind of already made that decision before 9/11. Although 9/11, that might have been kind of the icing on the cake, so to speak. I mean, that might have been something that I said, yeah, you know what, I'm going to at least stay through what we termed at the time the global war on terrorism. But yeah, I don't think 9/11 was one of the, like a flip of the switch. Like I was like, well, I'm 100% getting out. 9/11 happened, and I was like, yeah, I'm 100% staying in. But I know for some people it was. Some people were like, we're getting ready to get out, and as soon as 9/11 happened, they stayed in. Or you have the folks that were civilians, and then 9/11 struck. I mean, you hear that every now and then, and somebody will be like, they were a lawyer or a stockbroker, and they decided to give it all up right after 9/11 and come in the Army. I see Pat Tillman. I mean, he's probably the premier example of somebody after 9/11. 9/11 happened, and everything he gave up, and eventually he gave up his life, obviously, unfortunately. So, but yeah, for me, I don't think 9/11 was one of those flip of the switch. It just probably codified what I was already going to do anyway. So.
And I know from your biographical information you filled out, you've done time, you had an assignment at the Pentagon. Was that pre or post 9/11?
No, it was post 9/11, and like I said, right after 9/11, we did the 3-Corps Warfighter and met my wife, at the time my future wife, and then I did a company command. At that time, I didn't deploy to OIF-1. I deployed soldiers, and Fort Riley was really in a state of flux for really all of 2003 and 2004. But I finished command April 2004. I got selected at the time. I put my name in the hat to be drawn. It's a board. But it's called the Joint Staff Intern Program. Joint Staff Fellow. You really go kind of as a fellow. It's a fellowship, really. But fortunately for me, I mean, I was a lucky man. I got selected for that program. They send you to Georgetown for 3 semesters. You get a graduate degree in public policy management. and then you work on the Joint Staff for a year, and then you work on the Army Staff for a year. So I did graduate from Georgetown, then worked on J5 Middle East on the Joint Staff. At that time, it was now General Retired Meyer. He was the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, and then he switched out with now retired General Pete Pace, the first Marine Corps general to be the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, which was a great time. I mean, it was a little over a year. That's what you do, about a year in about a year. But that was a great experience. That was when Iraq was really, it's a great experience for me. That was when Iraq was really, really at the forefront. I mean, 2005, 2006, there's some dark days, really dark days in Iraq at the time. But that was kind of our portfolio. We had all in North Africa, Iraq, Iran, Syria, all the Arabian Peninsula, all the countries that you never have any problems with, But no, it was a very busy time, especially during that time, 2004, 5, 6, 7. And then I went to the Army Staff, its Office of Chief of Public Affairs. It's a strategic communication and coordination group that was under the Chief of Public Affairs, and did that. It was pretty good stuff. I worked the President Ford funeral, for example, and the Army Association, the Army Birthday Association, really. It's the AUSA convention, so that's what they call it. So I did that for a year, and then I volunteered to be a transition team chief in Iraq. And that's when I was assigned to 1st Brigade, 1st Infantry Division at Riley. They assigned all the transition team folks to that brigade, and then you deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. A lot of folks were deploying to Afghanistan then as well.
That was, you were deployed, and then you were there for the Surge at Baghdad.
Yeah, towards the tail end. So yeah, I got to Riley late spring '07. Assigned to 116 Infantry. It was weird back then. That whole brigade was reorganized as a transition team training brigade. So you actually was assigned to a specific battalion in 1st Brigade, and then you deployed. You stayed assigned to that battalion, that company. Well, it really is the battalion headquarters, and then deployed to either Iraq or Afghanistan. But when we deployed to Baghdad at the time, we actually fell under 4th Brigade, 1st Infantry Division, which was at that time it's 128 Infantry, the Black Lions. And they had 4th Brigade had a really rough area. I mean, that whole area is really kind of southwest Baghdad, just right outside of Bayat, which is the Baghdad International Airport. The green zone all the way down south. That was that whole brigade area. And then the 128 Infantry Battalion area was really that area all the way from Baghdad International Airport all the way to, it was the main road coming in. They called it Route Irish in Jackson. Northwest, it's called Northwest Farad area of Baghdad. No, but that was about bad time, a really bad time. Probably most of the worst stuff, quote unquote, worst violence was about over when we got there. We got there early October '07, but there's still a lot of nasty stuff going on. And especially the good thing about that time period is the reconciliation had really taken hold by then. A lot of the dark days that happened in early '07, when it was really, really violent, had kind of subsided, and then the reconciliation process was really in full swing then by late summer 2007. So
going in there, what were your feelings when you first heard you were going to Iraq? Apprehension? What were the reactions of you?
Well, it was my situation was a little bit different because I hadn't deployed obviously to Iraq up to that point. But working in the Joint Staff, actually I'd gone there, but just as a command visit. It was go there for a few days in Baghdad, and you fly in, and it was part of the joint, what I did on the Joint Staff. But seeing all the intel, because again, J5 Middle East, since our portfolio was Iraq, we had Iraq division, and then you had the other Middle East division that had the other countries. So I mean, I was linked in with all the intel and analysis of all the who, what, when, where, why, everything dealing with Iraq. So obviously, when I knew I was, because I volunteered to be a transition team, I could have PCS from DC and gone straight to Leavenworth to go to, at the time, CGSC, Command General Staff College. Now it's called the Intermediate Level Education, ILE. But I chose because I knew my deployment number was coming up, because I hadn't deployed, I hadn't deployed for a full tour. So that's why I volunteered to be the transition team. And at that time, almost everybody was going to Iraq. There were still a few groups that were going to Afghanistan as transition teams, but almost everybody was going to Iraq because it was a surge then. So that's why the big push was getting as many transition teams into Iraq as possible, because they partner up the transition teams at least with like Iraqi infantry battalions. You had police transition teams, so they partnered with like the Iraqi police units, for example. But it was, there was apprehension because there were still a lot of folks dying then, even at that time in 2007. Even the summer of 2007, there were still a lot of casualties routinely in Iraq. So there's apprehension. I mean, nobody wants to die. At that time, my youngest son was less than 1. I think, he was, when I deployed, he just turned 1, so 13, 14 months old. I mean, nobody wants to leave their young child. I mean, because you don't know. I mean, at that time, there were a lot of transition team guys that died, proportion. When you look at proportionality, a lot of them had died or been seriously wounded, and a lot of them died even after I'd gotten there too. So I mean, it's always goes in the back of your mind. We understand that this is a dangerous business and people die. I mean, I've known quite a few names of the list either in Iraq or Afghanistan of folks who gave their life, but you don't want to be one of them. I mean, I never wanted to be. I don't want to be on a black granite wall somewhere. I really don't want to. If I end up on there, then that happens, it happens, but I certainly don't want to ask to be a name on a black granite wall one day. I really don't. So it's definitely apprehension. For my wife, too. Obviously, she's in the military. She knows the deal. But, she doesn't want to, here's my husband going off to war. He may not come back. So obviously there's apprehension for her. I mean, obviously 2 small children as well. The good thing is we were at Fort Leavenworth. So my parents are an hour away, so that helped a lot. The summer of 2007, she was going through ILE, intermediate level education at the time, and then I deployed. So that was nice. It's probably the best of situations we could ever ask for, and we asked for it. We asked for it by design, because I said I volunteered to deploy because I knew they'd tag me. If I went to Leavenworth, they'd tag me as soon as I graduated anyway. And then they probably would have tagged her as well also. So we're like, listen, we either stagger our deployments, I deploy, then you deploy, or we both deploy at the same time, but then our young kids are without both of us for a year. I mean, they're only 1. Our youngest son's a little over 1, our other son's not even 3. So had the kids been older, we probably would have volunteered to deploy at the same time, just to make it a little bit easier. So. But yeah, it was definitely apprehension, and I just like the kids going now to Afghanistan. I mean, that's still a very violent place. Although now it's the winter season, so I think the casualty rates historically go lower in the winter time frame. But I mean, there's always apprehension whenever you're going someplace that you probably will get shot at or attacked. I mean, there's always apprehensions because it is. I mean, I look at some of the folks that I know that gave their life, that were killed in Iraq or Afghanistan, and I mean, you're just like, that could have been me. So I guess that always goes in the back of your mind. So
at the same time, you felt apprehension. A lot of soldiers describe a feeling of anxiety that they've been training for this their entire lives, and that I wouldn't say it's looking forward to it, but it's anxiety to get it over with.
Yeah, and that's what I felt, especially because for the transition team training, you're at Fort Riley, Kansas. At that time, you were at Fort Riley, Kansas. So you trained I was there almost 3 months. So you're training, your team's together as a 12-man team. Actually, technically it's an 11-man team. We ended up with a 12th guy once we got there, another medic. But at that time, it was an 11-man team. And you train together, and you're obviously going to deploy together and fight together in that case. But it is, I mean, at that time, because we knew we were going to deploy eventually anyway, we're just going like, hey, listen, we're training. It was pretty good training, and as a group, my team, we definitely started off really well at Fort Riley. A lot of really good talent. but then you get to the point where like, listen, we know we're going to go anyway, so let's just go over there and get it done. And, prove to ourselves that our training has been worthwhile. But there is. I mean, I know there's definitely a lot of anxiety when it comes to units, because the ramp up for training is, I mean, it's pretty steep, and it's several months out when you start training up to go. Now the units go in Afghanistan, since we're not deploying units to Iraq anymore. So there's a lot of apprehension, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of anxiety, because the kids are, I mean, you're training up for war, and nobody wants war. Nobody, whenever Afghanistan eventually winds down, hopefully there's some type of closure. But whatever we'll constantly train just like we did before 9/11, but I hope nobody ever thinks we want a war just to test out our skills. So I don't think anybody really wants that. But now, for example, I mean, Iraq was going on at the time. Obviously now Afghanistan's still going on. But I guess it is. I mean, you're going to probably deploy or eventually deploy, and you do want to test your skills that you've developed and honed in what we call CONUS in the United States, in a training environment, to see if you can meet the match. Because, I mean, that's what we do. I mean, we train for war. I mean, that's what we do. When we go to the ranges, we go through driver's training. I mean, some of the MOSs, when you have tankers, I mean, they're operating M1s. They go to the range to shoot tank targets. I mean, you're training to shoot an enemy tank. I mean, that's what they do. That's what they spend most of their time doing, is their different levels of gunnery tables. Culminating into like a combined live fire exercise. I mean, where you're attacking an enemy force, so to speak. So it is. I mean, it's not like playing, cops and robbers or something like that. But it is. I mean, and it is. I mean, you do get an adrenaline rush. Obviously, combat is the ultimate adrenaline rush, and that's probably why some of these kids probably have some problems, because it is. I mean, it's amazing when you go outside the wire and you'll probably get attacked, or you at least think you might get attacked, if nothing else. But it is. It's a very. I mean, the adrenaline gets pumping, and it is. It's probably. I've heard some soldiers saying it's the ultimate high, or it's kind of like the ultimate game. I don't personally look at it that way, because I wanted to avoid as much as possible. But for some kids, it is. I mean, for some kids, it is a big time rush. And I guess some of the problems we've had in the past is some of these kids can't make that switch when they're not deployed. You can't just flip a switch, because it's all based on your mental apathy and stuff like that, and you don't have a switch on your brain to say, okay, let's be serious now, and then switch it off and say, okay, no, you're in garrison environment. Be cool about it. But it is. I mean, the anxiety. It is. I mean, I felt that being at Riley. It's like, oh man, we're going to Iraq. And at that time, Baghdad, or the Iraq surge was in full swing. I mean, we didn't know how it was going to go. When we first got to Riley, that's when it was still kind of on the fence on, is it really the whole General Petraeus, what would become basically General Petraeus doctrine as far as the surge. Like, we really wasn't sure in late 2006, early 2007 if it was actually going to work or not. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Now they look back on it like, oh yeah, it was this great plan, and of course it was going to work. But I'm telling you, I was in the Pentagon doing that stuff, and it was hit or miss on if it was going to truly work or not. We really didn't know. So that's probably what the anxiety was, is just like combat. You never know what the next day is going to hold in a combat situation. So I think anybody, if you're halfway sane, I think you're going to be you're going to have anxiety. Just like I think anybody that's definitely halfway sane, I think you're definitely going to be scared when you're in that type of situation. I know I was definitely scared, because nobody wants to die. I mean, and you never know. I mean, it's that one bullet, that one round might have your name on it. You don't know. Had a few close scrapes, and it's like, had the bullet been a few feet to the left or right, the story might have been totally different. And
now, were those the close scrapes you mentioned? Were they when you were in Baghdad, or were they when you went to Mosul and part of the 3rd ACI?
Yeah, it was 2 close scrapes in Baghdad, and then unfortunately we had a lot of close scrapes in Mosul later on when we went there in early 2008. Baghdad, like I said, had wound down a little bit, but there's still plenty of bad actors in Baghdad. And there's a couple pretty good scrapes we got into in Baghdad, a couple good firefights, significant firefights. And like I said, I mean, it was, you don't know. I mean, a bullet, you don't know if a bullet's meant for you or not. Same thing in Mosul. We had at that time, a lot of Iraqi soldiers that were killed. I mean, we were with them in the vicinity, and they were shot by snipers. A lot of VBIDs, the vehicle-borne IEDs, very large, vehicles packed with explosives. And you never know. For us, we lucked out. A lot of it's luck. I mean, some of it is knowing where not to go. I don't think that area at this time we really need to be there. But a lot of it's just luck. I mean, when somebody's shooting at you and the bullet doesn't hit you, a lot of it's luck. Now you get down in a covered position, but other folks get shot and they're doing all the right things. So it's definitely, a lot of it's luck. That's why I tell people, I mean, you can do what I always tell my soldiers, and when we're in 94th doing situational training lanes, because we do it, when I was in the 94th, we did OEF focus, Afghan focus situation training lanes. So it's like you're in Afghanistan. But they would get wrapped around the axle. A lot of us young platoon leaders that hadn't ever deployed, and the junior enlisted soldiers that are fairly new in the Army and hadn't deployed. But I said, don't get wrapped around the axle, because you can do everything wrong and never get hit. I mean, it is. You can do everything wrong, and sometimes you get negative reinforcement by folks going in combat. Because I've seen veterans saying, this is how we rolled in Iraq. I mean, they would explain to me, I'm like, that's insane, man. You're lucky. You're lucky half your crew didn't get killed. And then you find other folks that did everything by the book, and they just had they just got hit pretty significantly. And that's why I would tell them, you can do everything wrong and never get hit, and you think that's the way to roll because you're just lucky. And you could do everything right and still get hit. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It's just the enemy always has a vote. And when it comes to an enemy in a combat situation, every chapter is unique. Every chapter is not the same as what was written before. It's always a new chapter, and that's why it's like we have techniques, tactics, and procedures and battle drills, and we say if the enemy attacks with small arms fire and an IED at the first vehicle, we do X, Y, Z. I mean, we have battle drills like that that are pretty refined, but they're not perfect because they're not cookie cutter, because every situation is unique. You might have 2 civilians over here instead of 5 civilians like you rehearse. You can't rehearse something that's in the future in a combat situation because there's millions of variables that are always in play. And that's why I tell people, I was like, you just have to be able to react quickly, and hopefully you make the right decision. But the true test is, in the aftermath, but just because someone was killed or seriously injured doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong. It's just, maybe that was just unfortunate. The enemy situation was just that significant that you couldn't do anything about it.
Could you give an example of doing everything wrong? You're not in the military, you're not in the combat.
Yeah, no, that's, well, and I got to be honest, is the way the transition teams were employed in Baghdad, I think was probably the way it should be. At that time, each team had 3 up-armored Humvees. Now, at the time, the policy was every American unit had to have at least 4 up-armored Humvees to roll outside the wire. That was a standard, but they said, I guess there was an exception at that time for, if you're a transition team, you could roll with just 3 American vehicles. That's all we had. We only had 11 soldiers total on our team, and you always had 1 person on hire and 1 leave. Now, when we got up to Mosul, they said, oh no, the policy is, up there, the way 3rd ACR structure worked, I guess. They said, no, as long as you had 2 American vehicles and you had additional Iraqi vehicles with you, you were cool. You could operate like that. I didn't agree with it, but the transition team chain of command at that time, the brigade level, and the division level structure at the time, that's how they operated. I never agreed with that, and during the time we were up there, no transition team guys died, but wow, we all got into a lot of big firefights, a lot. So I think it's an absolute miracle nobody died because, for example, the brigade structure that we fell into, and it's now Colonel Jeff Meeker, he was the brigade team chief. but they got into some pretty serious scrapes, and he would just roll with 2 American vehicles, and then he'd be with the Iraqi Brigadier General and his PSD, Personal Security Attachment. And, they had the Iraqi Brigadier General, they're going to be rolling with quite a few guys. But I don't think that was the standard of how to roll and roll out in sector, to operate in sector. But when we showed up in Mosul, that's what they said. They said, oh, well, the standard is 2 American vehicles. I'm like, nah, that's not. I was like, maybe this is the standard here, but that's not the standard in Baghdad. Because in Baghdad, they were proven that there's plenty of intel, especially for the Shiite extremists, the Jaish al-Mahdi, the JAM groups. That was the al-Sadr's boys. That was his organization. But there's intel, and I saw intel, and I saw the flyers that said, look for an American convoy that only has 3 vehicles in it, and that's a lot of, because the transition teams had a lot of high-ranking folks on it. You had senior NCOs, and you had all officers. So out of 11 soldiers, 11 folks, it was 5 officers and 6 non-commissioned officers. So they said, look for 3 American vehicles, because I think they call them like the Special Forces team or something. It was incorrect on what they thought it was, but it was still the same intent. So that's why at least in Baghdad, they eventually went to, you had to have 4 American vehicles operating in sector. So every transition team got a 4th vehicle by that infantry battalion or that Dime Armor Battalion, CAF squadron that was in that sector. But Mosul was totally different, and everyone except me, every team except my team rolled with 2 American vehicles, and they had their Iraqi counterparts that made up the difference. I didn't agree with that. And like I said, they thought it was because nobody died. They thought that was the standard. I'm like, well, just because nobody dies doesn't mean it's right. You could do something stupid 100 times and never get hurt. That doesn't mean it's right doing it. Taking a risk, taking an undue chance. You see that, with the folks like on the Jackass movies and stuff. Well, yeah, they did something insane and they didn't get hurt. Well, that doesn't mean it's the right way to do business. You were just lucky. I mean, that's kind of the example I always give people, and sometimes I get emotional about it because I did have some heartburn on how they operated like that, because I don't think it was right. But it was a resource-constrained environment at the time, especially up in Mosul, and the transition teams especially. 3rd ACR had a heck of a time. I mean, they had an unbelievable hard mission to do up in Mosul at the time. So I guess, it's one of those, it's the commander's call. It's, here's my mission. I only have this amount of resources. I have to maximize the resources. And, commanders take risks. That's why commanders get paid the big bucks and are put in a position. They have to look at something that's very ambiguous. It's not black. It's never black and white. At least it's never been black and white for me. It's a very ambiguous, complex situation that you can't really scientifically dissect or analyze. It's so complex with the human factor. And you just have to look at it and make a good analysis and assume a certain amount of risk, and then you make a decision and you drive on with it. And that's what they did. So, I guess looking back on it, they had to make certain decisions. I didn't agree with it, though, at the time.
So you said that you were able to still, with your transition team, with 3 Humvees armored, so you went against the command?
Well, no, that was just how they said that they rolled. I refused to roll with less. I took all my guys and the 3 vehicles we had wherever we rolled out. And that's just they would leave 1 or 2 guys behind to do whatever or monitor the radios back at the FOB, the forward operating base. But I refused to do that. So we all went as a team and we all came back. That's how we moved in sector. That was like I said, that was the standard of Baghdad, and nobody's thought twice about that in Baghdad. But then you come up to Mosul, and it's almost a polar opposite. It's 180 degrees difference. So, but that's kind of always the example I use. Is I was like, there was such a discrepancy, and it's again the same time, same country of Iraq, same time, but you looked at different areas in Iraq. Again, same structure, transition teams. We're all formed the same. We all do the same training at Fort Riley. And yet you see a complete different discrepancy on if you were in Baghdad in 2007, this is how you operated, and then if you were in Mosul in 2007, 2008, this is how you operated. It was amazing, and the folks, all the transition teams up in Mosul had gone straight to Mosul. They didn't know otherwise. Your perception is the environment that you're in. So we would come up and we're like, no, this is. They would say, oh yeah, this is how the standard is. This is how blah 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 blah. And we're like, no, that's not how it's. I was like, go down. We just came from Baghdad. That's not how 4th Brigade, 1st Infantry Division's operating in Baghdad. I'm like, that's not how. At the time, it was 1st Cavalry Division was the division headquarters, and then they were replaced by 4th Infantry Division headquarters. That was Multinational Division Baghdad that ran that AO. But I was like, no, that's not how the division headquarters operates. It was totally different. That's why I was like, wow, you go to Baghdad and it's a completely different experience than if you go to Mosul. I mean, and it is. It's different circumstances, different enemy threat, but it was a complete diametrically opposed way of doing business. And that was just kind of interesting to me.
You were the highest ranking member of the transition team?
Yeah, so yeah, I actually had 2 other majors. They had just been promoted to major. They were senior captains when we were training, and then they were promoted to major a few months after we deployed. But I was obviously the senior major on the team.
Where did you sit in Humvee if you were the commanding officer? Were you
Well,
in the front Humvee? Or?
Yeah, for me, I was the front Humvee. Now, and that was, it goes back to battle drills and how that people structure. Like the team I replaced, he was in the trail vehicle. I was actually in the lead vehicle. So I was the lead Humvee, and then we got MRAPs. That was the lead Humvee, lead vehicle. Obviously in the TC, the passenger seat front. That's where I sat. The team that replaced me, he was the same thing. He was in the trail vehicle, and he put his infantry captain, who was the operations officer for the team, he put him as his lead vehicle. So it's different, because he asked me when they were training at Riley. I came back during R&R, when I was on R&R back in Kansas City, and they were training at Riley at the time. So I came out to Riley for a couple of days and talked with them about what we were doing and how everything was working. But I explained to him how I did business. He's like, "Oh no, that's not my infantry captain, who's my ops officer. He's the lead vehicle, so I can focus on commanding and stuff like." I'm like. Whatever floats your boat, man. I mean, that's what I told him. I was like, that's tomato. I mean, for me, it worked that way because I'm just the type of guy that if I'm in charge, I'm in charge. I lead from the front. I mean, that's how I am. Now, and other folks are like that. I mean, I'll see some folks who'll be like, no, if I'm the commander, I'm in the lead vehicle. Some people think like me, and then there's other folks, and I can see their thought process. They'll say, no, I don't want to be in the lead vehicle because I'm consumed with being in the weeds, so to speak. If I'm the lead vehicle, I'm not being the commander. I'm being the guide, the pathfinder, whatever you want to call him. So I can see both sides of the coin. I mean, and I can see that too. Like when you have like battalion level commanders, brigade level commanders, and they're not the lead vehicle. They have a PSD, they have a personal security detachment. So, yes, they're not in the lead vehicle. Usually they're in the center vehicle, for example. And I can see that. But as a transition team, when you're only 3 vehicles, there's 11 guys total, and that's when somebody's not on leave, and there's 3 vehicles. Well, I mean, that's a little bit different now. If I'm lucky enough to get battalion command, and if I deploy and there's a PSD with 4 or 5 vehicles, yes, I will not be the lead vehicle. I can tell you that right now. But that's a little bit different. That's why there's always a discrepancy. When I was a company commander, yes, I was not the lead vehicle as a company commander. In garrison, I didn't deploy as a company commander. When we did our field training exercise and we did convoys, it was always a ranking lieutenant in my chalk, my serial, the amount of vehicles in the convoy. He or she was the lead vehicle, or at least the convoy commander, for example. So.
You've mentioned R&R a few times and mid-deployment leaves. What was yours like? Was it what the Army expected it to be?
Oh yeah, like coming back from Iraq. Yeah, it was. For me, it was hard because it's very painful. At that time, and with this new 9-month deployment starting 1 January 2012, the Army's only going to do 9-month deployments for most units. And the units that only do 9-month deployments, you won't do an R&R, a mid-tour leave, that's what they call it. But for me, it was hard. But my boys were so small, that's why I wanted to come back. But if my boys were a little bit older, I wouldn't have came back because it was hell. It's hell saying goodbye. You say goodbye, you go into a war zone. And then for me, it was about the mid-break when I think I'd been there about 7 months and then came back for R&R. You're only back for 15 days. So you're great to come back. I mean, it's great to come back. It was miserable flying from Mosul. Flew from Mosul to Baghdad to Kuwait. Get on a plane from Kuwait to Dallas, Fort Worth. I mean, it's like a 2-3 day. It was hell getting back, coming back to the States. But it was great coming into Kansas City International Airport and seeing them right there with balloons and stuff. My little boys at the time. I mean, it was great seeing that. But then 15 days later, you have to say goodbye again. I mean, that was horrible. That was absolutely horrible. And that's why I knew it was going to be horrible. And that's why I told my wife. I told her at the time, I was like, you know what? I don't know if I want to come back. I was like, I want to come back right now. But I was like, I don't know if I can come back to see you all and then 15 days later turn around and say goodbye again and then go back to that place. Especially at that time, it was hell up in Mosul. And to go back to that place 15 days later, I'm like, man, I can't do it. I mean, it was emotionally draining. But like I said, it was great getting off the plane and seeing him right there and eating Kansas City barbecue and stuff I love. And I love that piece. But then, like I said, you knew you were only there for a couple weeks and then you'd have to say goodbye again and go back to that war zone, that combat zone. And, and then, I mean, eventually you're going to redeploy a few months later, which is great because then you're like, okay, now at least I have a break regardless of what's going to happen in the future. At least you know you're going to be back for at least 12 months at a minimum. But it's like I said, it's great seeing the families, but it's hard because you have to say goodbye just a couple weeks later.
Was it right in the middle of your tour, or was it a little bit?
Yeah, for me, it's about. I think I'd been there about 7 months. I wanted to make it a little bit later, just so when I came back, I had less than half my time. Is a mental game for me. But because you can only have like 10 to 15% of your folks on R&R at any given time, and as soon as you get in the theater at that time, after about 2 or 3 months, somebody has to go on R&R. So you have folks that, like, you've only been there 2 months, they have to go on R&R because you have to stagger your folks. And then the folks at the very end, they're good because they come back and they only have like a couple months left. So like the 2 NCOs that took the last R&R on my team, they came back and we left less than 2 months later. So it was great. I mean, they came back, we're like, oh, you guys are back now, so we're really getting close to redeploying. But it's mentally draining for me. Like I said, if my 2 boys hadn't been, if they were probably at the age they are now, well, no, they're still too young. They're 5 and 7 now, but had they been a little bit older than that, I mean, I probably would have not come back because it was terrible. It was emotionally draining. Saying goodbye for R&R, going back to Mosul, for me, that was worse than saying goodbye when we were leaving from Fort Riley to go over at that time to go to Baghdad at the time.
Do you feel that was because you knew what to expect this time around? You knew where you were going back?
Yeah. You're going back to the hell spot. No, and that's what it is. I mean, at that time, like I said, some folks, depending on where they deployed, I mean, if they didn't leave deploying, you're still away from your family, your friends, and your comfort items. You're away from your home. But if you're at a big forward operating base and like the folks at Camp Victory in Baghdad, maybe it was a little bit easier for them because you weren't in the misery, you weren't getting shot at and stuff. I mean, some of the folks in my team was like that, especially up in Mosul. It was a miserable environment. We lived on this really godforsaken Iraqi cop called Cop Scorpion, and a combat outpost. It was this Iraqi camp out in western Mosul. It's basically in the middle of this industrial dump. That's really what it was, and it was a nasty area, a very nasty area. It had quieted down a lot by the time we left, but boy, when we got there, and even the time when I was going on R&R, I mean, we'd been hit by a lot of attacks, especially the vehicle-borne IEDs, and I mean, big ones. I mean, they really attacked a lot of the FOBs in early 2008. So that was an environment that had suicide bombers too. I mean, it's stuff that are like, it's a dangerous environment. So, and that's why you come back to the States, and we went out to Las Vegas for a few days, and you're enjoying it. And you're like, wow, this is great. And then you're like, wow, oh no, I have to go back to that place. And it is. I mean, it's tough because we're all human. I mean, we're not supermen and women. I'm certainly not. So it is. I mean, it's tough because you're like, wow, I'm leaving my family again, and it's still plus for me, it's still like, wow, it's still dangerous. I mean, not only are you leaving your family, but you're like, it's still dangerous, and I could be killed. I mean, you never know. It's every day you're out on mission, especially at that time. You never know. Thank God it didn't happen to me, or obviously to me, or none of my guys. Or I wouldn't be here. But thank God it didn't happen to any of my guys either. But it did. There's a few Americans that died during our tenure up in Mosul, and a couple of them were just unlucky attacks. Unfortunate attacks. So you never know, and that plays the mind games on you. You try not to think about it too much, because then you really get in a depressed state, and then you become. Like maybe the guys that develop PTSD and stuff, they can't shake that, because it can be overwhelming. If you think about it too much, it can really overwhelm you, because you start doing the numbers games. Like, you know what, that I probably should have been killed or seriously injured when that IED went off, or had we not been here, had we been here, we might have been seriously injured or even killed when this one VBID went off. You play those games like, hey, we actually should have been here during that time, but we weren't. It plays mind games with you, and then after a while, that's why you kind of have to kind of shield it and step back and say, you know what, I'm not even going to think about it, because, that's what I do. Maybe I'll think about it, I'll talk about it every now and then, but then I usually say, you know what, it's getting a little, you start playing the mind games, and then you say, okay, enough. I'm not going to think about it or talk about it anymore,
As you describe suicide bombers and being shot at by Iraqis, but you also work closely with Iraqis, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What were your preconceptions of Iraqis, and did that change over time?
Yeah, it's sorry, and I have to be honest, it's the Iraqi battalion that we mentored. It was actually a mix of mostly Shia soldiers, junior enlisted soldiers that were Shiites. Some of the leadership were Sunni, and then they had Yazidis, which are a different kind of sect. They had some of them in the battalion headquarters as well. We were always apprehensive. The Iraqi battalion commander, the battalion XO, and actually the battalion XO was Peshmerga. He was Kurdish. It was kind of a melting pot battalion. Kind of had all the major ethnicities and different religious types in Iraq, but we were always hesitant, because just like in Afghanistan, and I think they've had more problems in Afghanistan, where like a soldier in the unit turns his weapon on Americans. But that had actually happened up in Mosul right before we got there. There was a Captain Inman, and one of his NCOs was shot. There was I guess he was a Sunni insurgent or Al-Qaeda Iraq insurgent that was in one of the units, and they were doing a recon, and he opened up on them and killed the two of them and wounded 2 or 3 other Americans. So we rolled into that environment at that time. So 3rd ACR they were very standoffish when it came to working with Iraqis, because you don't know, just like in Afghanistan. You hear every now and then about this Afghani soldier turns his weapon and kills 2 Americans, because you don't know. And we were always hesitant, because you would look at some of these Iraqi soldiers and they would just kind of give you the evil stare. So you don't know if that was just their demeanor, or if they were kind of like, you're next. So we always kept armed. Even on the little Iraqi combat outpost, which is technically secure, although the way the Iraqis secure their bases isn't like the Americans secure our bases. But we were always hesitant. Although the Iraqi battalion commander, especially the Kurdish battalion XO, I really trusted the Kurdish battalion XO, and his PSD was all his family members. They're all former Kurdish Peshmerga fighters. I definitely trusted them. And the Iraqi battalion commander, most of his PSDs were his family, members of his family, or they were Yazidis, which the Yazidis were kind of looked down upon by most of the Muslim, even the Shiites and the Sunnis, because they consider themselves Muslims, but the Shiites and Sunnis don't consider them Muslims. They kind of consider them blasphemous because of so they're kind of like outcasts. So I trusted them, and that's why the Iraqi battalion commander trusted them too. He's like, hey, I really trust the Yazidis, because they're kind of like a ethnic minority that's kind of downtrodden upon. But yeah, there's a lot of soldiers I was always hesitant in the back of my mind, because you never know. It happened to Captain Inman and the NCO that was with him right after we left. So that would have been, late 2008, early 2009. There was a couple other incidents in Mosul where Iraqi soldier on Iraqi base, when Americans were visiting, turned their weapons on them. I know there's at least one incident. I think a couple Americans were killed in one incident, and I think maybe one or two other Americans were killed after we had left. So, and it happened a few other times too. And I know it's happened several times up in Afghanistan. I don't know how they're dealing with Afghanistan, but I bet there's probably a lot of American forces in Afghanistan right now, present day, that they're probably hesitant when they look around. They see Afghan National Army troops, some of them, and Afghan National Police Force, because you don't know, because there's been several incidents where they turned their weapons on Americans or other coalition forces. So that's why it's hard, because you trust somebody wearing the American flag, but somebody that's not, you don't really know them. But the good thing about being a transition team is because you're embedded with that unit, you get to know them really well. So that's why I ended up trusting. I learned to trust certain folks, and then the other Iraqi folks, other soldiers in the Iraqi battalion, if I didn't know them, I didn't trust them, because you never knew. You never knew if you let your guard down, if they would be that 1% or that 1 or 2, members of Al Qaeda in Iraq that were in that unit just to wait for an opportune time to kill 1 or 2 Americans. You never knew. That's why you were always safe and prepared for the worst.
What was your knowledge of Arabic or Islam before you made it to Iraq?
Well, because I worked J5 Middle East, and we had foreign area officers. They're Americans, obviously, but they were like skilled Arabic linguists. They worked in the U.S. embassies in North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula and stuff like that, and just studying that. Being in that type of culture. And we also did, at that time, there's actually an Iraqi defense attaché. So that's who we dealt with. We dealt with really all the Muslim countries, all the Arab countries, when I was on the joint staff. So I had a lot of interaction with a lot of the Arabic leaders, because they're all defense attachés. They're all ranking members of the military for that respective nation. So I wasn't completely blind, but I just hadn't immersed myself into that culture. One of our daycare providers, she was actually from Tunisia. So I was spending myself up on Arabic, for example, the proper form of Arabic, not the Iraqi dialect. There's a little bit difference, but I guess I knew somewhat of the culture. But until you actually get there and you're immersed into it, it's amazing what you can learn back in the United States over a year. You can learn there in about a week. Because you're there, because you hear the Arabic language all the time from the Iraqis, because we lived with them, and we lived at the Iraqi combat outpost. I ate with the Iraqi battalion commander almost every day for breakfast and lunch and dinner when we were on mission doing whatever. So, and hearing them, of course, he always wanted to perfect his English, so he always tried to speak English. And the same thing, because we had a lot of interpreters with us. So at one point we had like 8 Iraqi interpreters that worked on my team. So almost every one of us had an interpreter with us. So we would, and most of them were young, so they were very interested in American culture. So obviously they spoke English, that's why they were interpreters. But then we would pick their brains on certain Arabic words and stuff like that. But like I said, it's amazing that you study for a year, and then when we're at Fort Riley for 2 or 3 months, and in the first 1 or 2 weeks that we're in Iraq, I'm like, wow, we've learned more in 1 or 2 weeks than we did the whole past year. But it's the cultural immersion. Same thing like when people do study abroad and stuff. You can study German here, but go live in Germany. Living in Germany, being stationed in Germany, it's amazing. Because I took German in college, and then I was like, wow, I took like 3 semesters of German in college, but being in Germany for just a few weeks, I was like, I should have just come here for 2 or 3 weeks, and I would have learned more than being, back in the college environment, studying German and go through the German classes.
So in April of 2008, you re-garrisoned, you deployed back to the stateside.
Is October 2008, yeah.
How was your transition now that you were going to be at home for?
Yeah, what was hard, the good thing is I knew I was going to obviously we were already at Leavenworth because we moved to Leavenworth since my wife's son was going to that class now. And it's one of those things, you pick your poison, and we asked for it, and we knew it was going to be tough, but essentially I redeployed, and then we already knew this. I mean, it was going to happen, so we had no choice. And then she was going to deploy about 4 weeks after I got back. So that was tough because, it was a difficult environment, it was a difficult deployment, and then coming back and trying to become a dad again, so to speak, and then knowing at the same time my wife was deploying in about 4 to 5 weeks because she left about 5 weeks after I got back for her 1 year deployment. She worked with the Army Corps of Engineers in southern Iraq. But that was tough. That was a tough transition because I was trying to make the switch, and like I said, it's not like a light switch where you're like, okay, I'm back now, click, and I'm cool. I mean, everything's good. It was rough because I was still thinking about a few things that was going on in Iraq, and playing the numbers game, the statistic game, and stuff like that. But it was tough, and for the first probably 2 or 3 months, it was very rough trying to learn to be, because I'm telling you, trying to take care of a kid at that time was almost 2, and then almost 4. That was tough. I was like, wow, I thought it was actually hard in Mosul, but I was like, this is tough because it was tough for me. So making that switch, but it was the best because coming back, going to Fort Leavenworth, family close to home, I was like, this is as good as it can get. I was like, it can't get any better than this. But it was hard. It was hard trying to readjust back to a more calmer, little bit more. With little kids, it's never predictable, but it's somewhat predictable.
How did the Army facilitate transitioning back?
Let's see.
Did they keep you with the original 11-man team?
No, see, and that's what happened. The Army's really good when units deploy and redeploy, and you have the family structure, and we do that. We're dealing with that with 4th MEB, the battalion headquarters for 92nd MP battalions in Afghanistan. They're coming back in a few weeks. Right before Christmas, which is great. But it's good. There's a very regimented program because you're coming back to the location you just left from. Your family's there. There's a lot of classes, everything from the chaplain, Army Community Service. There's all these social network services that are available to you. For the transition team, and my wife went through the same thing because she was a individual augmentee that went 1 week at training at Benning, deployed to Iraq, and came back, and then came back to home station. So we came back from Riley. We did 3 days of out processing, and then we just went on our separate ways. So there was no decompression time. There was no, hey, as a unit, we're going to go through all this training, and because you're going full force and trying to ramp down incrementally to get back to a steady state. It wasn't like that. So it was rush, rush, rush. You come back to Riley for 2-3 days, and then you just you go back to your old duty station. So for me, okay, I go to Leavenworth and get ready for intermediate level education. So, and that was it. So basically it's all on your own. The same thing with my wife. I mean, she came back, she went through 2 days at Benning coming back, and then we PCS to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. So anything like, hey, I'm still stressed, I need counseling, I need help. I mean, basically you're doing it all on your own. So, and that's tough. I mean, I'm surprised there's not more folks that actually have a problem because there's a lot of transition, small teams that deploy like that. You came together as a group, you deployed, you came back, and then you just went your separate way. Same thing for the individual augmentees. You're just selected as an individual to go deploy to a headquarters or a unit. And then when you come back, you just go to your old duty station or a new duty station. So you're just on your own. That's really what I was. I'm just, you PCS, if you need an issue, if you need help or assistance, you just have to go ask for it. So, and that's why it's good with the units that come back and deploy, because it's a very regimented, very thorough process. So.
Do you keep in contact with any people from your transition team?
Yeah, one of my NCOs and one of the officers I do. The other guys are just we've kind of just drifted apart, I guess. Maybe in the next few years we'll come back. So, it was a rough time. Some of my guys were a little bit upset on like I said, it was a very high up tempo, very We got into quite a few firefights and scrapes and stuff like that, and that wears on people after a while. So there were some folks that were a little bit bitter, towards the end of the deployment, and probably good that, we got back and we quickly went our separate ways, because it was, after you're a small team like that, when you're training up 2-3 months, then you deploy to a pretty intensive environment for basically a year, you get tired of each other after a while. So it's probably good everybody kind of went their separate ways, and it was, like I said, I love them to death, and we all had each other's backs. It's just, I think we had grown tired of each other, because it's all those little nuances, like somebody, you don't like something about somebody, and it just keeps nagging at you every time you see them. And I think that's probably kind of what it was, because it was a rough time. My guys went through a lot of pain. So, like I said, thank goodness everybody came home safe and sound. So that's why I considered it was a success. It's like nobody was really injured. Nobody, of course, died. So I consider it a success. Although there's a lot of rough roads along the way. So it definitely wasn't perfect.
Now, having both been deployed, do you feel that you and your wife were able to help each other with? Mm-hmm. Were you able to help her with her transition back stateside?
Yeah, and her situation was a little bit different because she was working with the Corps of Engineers with doing projects. Although they would go out on convoys and occasionally get attacked, it's a little bit different though. Her situation was a little bit more predictable, but she was still going through. It was still tough for her because she's a great mom, a great wife, and she definitely didn't want to leave the kids, especially because again they're still small, but even then they were 2 and 4. They were 2 and 3 technically then. 2 and 4, I guess. Our oldest son had just turned 4 when she left. But, and that was tough for her, leaving her 2 boys and going over there. So it was tough, especially while she was over there. But coming back, she seemed to adjust. I think she adjusted a lot better coming back than I did. For me, it was kind of rough. But it's a little bit different, too, though, because I came back and then she left. Where she came back and then we left to Leonardwood to get, we're together. We go to Leonardwood. So we're both together after she came back. So it's a little bit different situation than what I had. But she definitely tackled it pretty well.
So. Are you both?
Let me stop you for a second. I need to change discs.
Okay, we can probably take a break too.
Okay.
I think we ran over.
And I'm rolling again. Go ahead.
All right. Well, we covered your wife and yours deployment and how you've transitioned back to the States, and the Army's been helping you with that. Yeah. What about the reasons behind the surge in Baghdad? And now, the hindsight is 2020, but now the mismanagement and the disbandment of the Ba'ath Party and the disbandment of the Iraqi military really led to the insurgency. How does that play into your views on your services during the surge? Yeah,
I obviously, because I was... At that time, I was still at Riley. I was getting ready to leave command, but there was all that discussion when I had just left command and I went to D.C. And being at Georgetown University, especially in 2004, 2005, and all the seminars and discussions, and it was. I guess it kind of angered me too. But again, it's hindsight's 2020 when you're doing the fight every day, so to speak. It's hard to just say, well, Paul Bremer should have done X, Y, Z. President Bush and Vice President Cheney should have done X, Y, and Z. It's hard to say that. But you do look back on it, it's like, yeah, well, why the heck did we do some of the things we did in early 2003? Because it seemed like we rolled in there and we didn't have a very good, the Phase 5 plan, Phase 4, Phase 5 plan as far as the transition, the stability of the country for Iraq, obviously in this case, and then the transition to some type of civil authority. There was really no plan. It was just all go in, guns blaze, basically kick out Saddam Hussein and then declare victory. That's why I was upset too when you saw the mission accomplished banner. On the aircraft carrier. I looked at it too. I was like, what? And just after being in Kosovo, and that had only been a few years before at that time, and I was like, wow, Kosovo kind of rough, and then still, Kosovo still kind of has some rough edges, even though it's an independent nation now. But when you see what some of the decisions that they made that were like, hey, okay, Saddam Hussein's gone, anybody associated with him, we're basically just going to push off to the side or throw in jail or force him to exile. It was just... but it is. It's hindsight's 2020, and I guess at the time they had to make certain decisions. It just obviously they were wrong decisions because it created a lot of destabilization of the nation of Iraq, and plus it did fuel the insurgency. And I think that's what they're worried about kind of now because as we leave now rapidly from Iraq, I think they're still hesitant on, because it's a Shia-led government, that some of the, and I saw a report, I guess there's certain Sunni Ba'ath, members of the Ba'ath Party that have, I guess, been rearrested by the Iraqi government, so to speak. I saw that just a couple days ago. Which, that'll just fuel the fire again for that. So
now, being a career soldier, could you almost, I don't know if sympathize is the right word, but understand the insurgency from, a disbandment of the Iraqi military, telling them that you don't have a job anymore, your income.
Oh yeah, no, I could definitely see them, and being up in Mosul, I didn't see it really too much in Baghdad, but you see it up in Mosul as like the folks that they paid to in place IEDs. Those weren't AQI bigwigs. There was a poor guy that was unemployed, and you saw it a little bit in Baghdad, but the folks up in Mosul, I felt sorry for them because a lot of them that were killed were unemployed. They didn't have a skill set because they were undereducated or uneducated. They had no skill set, and they were trying to feed their families. So and the insurgency took advantage of that. And the same thing in Baghdad is they saw military-age males that didn't have a job, and they're like, okay, you are, they're preying on them. It's like, okay, you're a vulnerable target. If I give you $100, you'll go do about anything I tell you to do. That's the same thing in Mosul. So I had a lot of sympathy for him too. And that's why when I'd see him arrest certain folks, I'm like, you know what, this poor guy is just, he's not some big wig terrorist. He probably didn't even really hate Americans. He probably didn't hate the Iraqi government. He's just trying to feed his family. And I mean, I did, and I would tell the Iraqi battalion commander too. I was like, you know what? I was like, sometimes, I look back at it and I'm like, you know what? If I was in that position that they were, would I do what they're doing? I mean, and I always ask myself that. I'm like, if I was in Iraq, if I was a Sunni Arab and I was in the bigwig in the Iraqi army, because a lot of the Sunnis obviously had positions of power, and then you came in, you kicked out Saddam Hussein, because a lot of people liked Saddam Hussein. Most people hated him, but you'd find a lot of folk, quite a few folks that would say fairly good things about Saddam, as far as even some of the Shiites would say some things like saying, at least under Saddam, even though he was a brutal butcher, but they would say a lot of things were more predictable then. That's what I would hear him say in 2007, 2008. Is they said, you know what, Saddam was evil, but at least it was more predictable than it is now. That's what some folks would tell me. But it's like America, you got 310 million different opinions. So I mean, every Iraqi has a different opinion. So you can't say, well, Iraqis think like this. But it was kind of surprised me how many folks asked different opinions of that. But I'd always think every now and then a situation would occur, and I'd be like, you know what, if I was in his shoes, would I be doing what he did? So I mean, I guess I had some sympathy and empathy for some time for some of the situations, because it is. I mean, in the end, you go, Mosul's a little bit different, especially in western Mosul where we operated, because there was some pretty poor communities out there, and it is. I mean, some no electricity or limited electricity, and relatively shabby dwelling, and it is. And you go in there, and it'd be like the man, his wife, and they'd have like 8 kids, and it is. You feel sorry for them, like, man, God. I mean, they were getting like subsidies from the Iraqi government, I think, like food subsidies and stuff. But I mean, I'd feel sorry for him, because I'd be like, well, if there's no jobs for you to work, I mean, you're gonna protect your family and help your family, and I'd be like that too. I mean, if you're unemployed, it'd be surprising maybe some of the things you'll do to help provide for your family. I mean, it's easy for us to say. I mean, it's easy for me to have a steady job and a steady paycheck, and a pretty darn good paycheck, to say, well, I would never do that. Well, I don't know. If you put me in a horrible position, I can't really say that I wouldn't. I would hope I wouldn't do that, but you can't ever really say that you wouldn't do that. But you would hope that you wouldn't lower yourself to that position. But you never know. So.
Now that the surge has been credited as being a fairly military success. Do you feel that President Obama's decision now to demobilize and to pull out, do you think that's politically or strategically motivated?
I mean, I personally think it's politically motivated. I mean, and he ran on the campaign of, hey, I'm going to, and remember at that time it was him and Secretary Clinton. They were going back and forth on he could do the more bravado on the whole Iraq war. Although it's amazing because when they're running for president, it was already winded down anyway. That's why there was such a big deal about Iraq. Well, if I'm elected, I'll pull the troops out of Iraq. But that plan was already kind of put in place by the Bush administration. I mean, 31 December 2011. I mean that was made before he was elected president. It's just we thought at the time as a mark on the wall and it'd be renegotiated. We didn't realize that it was actually a true date and it wouldn't be renegotiated. But I mean, I think maybe it's politically motivated. But now if you look with the negotiations with the Iraqis not giving us immunity for us to stay longer, I mean, we really have no choice. And that's what it is the negotiations of keeping American troops there, and the al-Maliki government doesn't want to give immunity for American troops to stay there, which means we can't stay in a nation that doesn't give us immunity, because then that's just Americans have never done that. I mean, when I worked in the Joint Staff, that was basically the condition for anything is before American troops go in and do any type of training event in that nation, they have to be given immunity from local prosecution. So I don't know. I'm sure he's not too upset that that it happened. That like, oh, okay, we actually have to leave Iraq. But I'm hesitant. I think almost everybody that has served in Iraq is hesitant because, like I said, being a transition team chief, working with the Iraqi infantry battalion and training them, I'm like, maybe a lot has changed since I left in October 2008. A lot has, but I don't know if they're up to the task of totally securing their nation. I mean, it's in some aspects, it's a big house of cards, because you have the Sunni minority that feels kind of increasingly, I guess, threatened or at least marginalized. You have the Shia government that's under a lot of poking and prodding from Iran. And then you have the Kurdish situation up north with Kirkuk, fighting over the oil revenues and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of potential destabilizing factors in Iraq right now. Hopefully it doesn't, because nobody wants to see Iraq go down the bad path of increasing instability. But you'll see. I mean, it's not a safe place. You'll see suicide bombings are still occurring. There's still a lot of deaths, and like I said, the future's unknown in Iraq because you don't know. I mean, the Kurdish situation up north could really be a significant event, and I hope it doesn't, because I would feel bad too. Like if Iraq really turned into another, hopefully it doesn't turn into a civil war, but if it digressed into a really destabilized or unstable country, I mean, I'd feel bad because I'd be like, everything I did and all the Americans that lost, all the blood, sweat, and tears that we put in that country, was it really worth it? I don't know. I mean, I think that's what I would ask. So,
along with pulling out of Iraq, President Obama's also he repealed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and you were in ROTC, correct, when that was enforced by?
Yes, initially, yeah. Before they had the official policy of, they asked you, are you homosexual, yes or no? And then, while I was in ROTC, they did the change, whereas the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That's why it's interesting when it's come full circle. But yeah, and I know you guys were asked that, and we even talked about this on the bus last night. Like, hey, if they ask about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, if it makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to answer. Obviously, it doesn't make me uncomfortable. One of my brother-in-laws is a homosexual. One of my friends, who's actually, you might even know his name. He was killed in Iraq, but is Major Alan Rogers, who's now has come out. I mean, since he's died, he's came out as he was one of the driving forces behind. I mean, he was a homosexual soldier. I mean, if you haven't heard of his name, just Google it once we're done, and you'll see that he was in the same program as me when we were in Georgetown. We were in Georgetown together, went to Army staff together, and then we trained at Riley together. And I had just moved up to Mosul when he was killed in Baghdad. But he's one of the faces of the gay, lesbian, homosexual soldiers. I mean, as far as that, And there was an article when that was officially repealed in September, when the actual official date, they had an article about him. And I've known homosexuals in the military since I've served. I mean, I knew, and a couple of them had told me to. I mean, it violated don't ask, don't tell, but they told me, and I was like, that's your business. I mean, it was like, even though technically it's don't ask, don't tell, and they told me, including one when I was a company commander. I'm not uneasy at all. I mean, like I said, I've known people that are homosexual. And sometimes you might look at them like maybe he or she's gay or not. I mean, that's kind of a guessing game. But there's the homosexuals that's always been in the military. As far as agreeing with it, the only problem I have with the repeal of it is if you come like my headquarters, if you work for me, it's a more white collar type atmosphere. You know, we have more high rank, more senior and non-commissioned officers, more officers. I think a headquarters element can deal with it a little bit better. The problem, I have a little uneasiness with it, and I think the Marine Corps brought it up. At least I think it was General Conway before he retired as a Marine Corps Commandant. If you go to an infantry battalion, I mean, again, it's all males. It's full of piss and vinegar. I mean, the Army's a young man's game. Not to mean sound male chauvinist, but it's a young man's game, especially like an infantry battalion or combat arms battalion that has tankers in it, driving tanks and all that stuff, and infantrymen. I mean, those are pretty hardcore guys in there. And I don't know in a tight-knit platoon, if somebody comes in and is admitted homosexual, I don't know how they'll receive that. Because a lot of the Army, we're a driving force for social change. I mean, it's like the desegregation of the military. We lead a lot of the social changes and stuff. And I think the military is pretty receptive to a lot of things. I just don't know the next few years how receptive certain entities will be to admitted homosexuals. Especially, like I said, because some of these soldiers come in and they all have preconceived notions, and some of them have pretty strong biases. And I think some of the folks in the military, and I know this for a fact because I've talked to a lot of folks, there's some folks that have a lot of disagreements with homosexuality. And I don't know if they'll, like for me, it'd be like, somebody tells me they're gay, I'm like, okay. I mean, my brother-in-law is gay. I mean, his partner lives with him. They're under the California marriage. It's not California marriage, but it's like a joint domicile act. I mean, he's admitted homosexual. I love him to death. He's the greatest guy you ever want to meet. Do anything for you. So I'd be like, I don't care if you're homosexual. It doesn't matter anything to me. But I think there's a lot of folks that have a lot of disagreement and heartburn with it. But hopefully we don't hear any horrible incidents where somebody's like admitted homosexual and they get beat up or even beat to death, like what happened the Winchell incident that happened years and years ago down at Fort Campbell, when that soldier, I think he came out as he's gay and he was beat to death by some of his platoon mates. We definitely don't need something like that, because that's not right at all. But I think there are some soldiers, certain segment of soldiers that won't be very receptive to somebody being a homosexual. They just won't. I'm just thinking of in a basic training type environment, if somebody says they're homosexual, I don't know. I think you could see a certain group of guys or even gals that kind of form a clique against that person. But like I said, hopefully that doesn't happen. Most of the Western most of the Western armies, they have no restriction against homosexuals serving in the military, and they've done pretty well. So.
Now we're rounding off to the end of our interview. Is there anything that we've talked about that you'd like to revisit and expand upon?
I'm trying to think, going through the motions of what we talked. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's one of those things, I guess, talking about, 9/11 as far as serving in the military, does that maybe want to stay in the military or something like that? And I'm sure the questions for the younger kids that came in after 9/11 was like, well, did 9/11 join or encourage you or basically make you want to join the Army after 9/11? But I know one of those things, and we don't talk about it, but I think it's just the thread, and the Army's gotten a lot better at this now, is it's the taking care of the families. And the Army is, I think in the past, especially in the 9/11 split, before 9/11, there wasn't nearly as much focus on the families. Since 9/11, it's not really since 9/11, it's really since 2003, 2004, when you had that, just all the turmoil with everybody deploying and redeploying from Iraq, and there's all that family stress. Because people are in a war zone, you come back, but then you're away from your family, training up to deploy again. There's a lot of turmoil. A lot of spousal, divorce rate went sky high. I mean, there's kind of conjecture also with like the suicide rate kind of increase. But, it goes back to like the family values. And for me, I mean, family's important, the most important entity. I mean, the Army's important. I wouldn't say I really love the Army. I love aspects of the Army. I don't love the Army as a whole. I love my family. The Army's an organization. It's kind of hard. I love certain people in the Army. The organization is just kind of a inanimate object to me, so I can't really love a object, in my opinion. But I think the family values, that's what keeps me going, is the family ties. Like I said, luckily my wife helps. So when I talk shop, she understands what the heck I'm talking about. That really makes it easy. But it's really, I have a very supportive family of, very patriotic, very supportive of me being in the military, and I think that's what keeps a lot of folks in. I know the unemployment's high now, so that might be the driving factor on keeping some folks in, or actually for some folks, some of the kids, the soldiers joining the Army. But I think what keeps them in is actually the family support. I mean, because and I'll hear it time and time again, when the family's unhappy, the soldier's unhappy. I mean, that's the way it works. That's why I think the Army has gotten a lot better. It's not perfect, and there definitely is a ways to go, especially with the op tempo. Because we got to manage the op tempo so the families aren't too stressed. But I think it really, really means something and like I said, the Army's gotten a lot better on supporting families. Both of my kids are in daycare on post, child development center, not really daycare, basically daycare. I mean, as far as I'm concerned. But that's changed a lot. There's a lot of better Army community service. There's a lot of other family events. They're really trying to take care of the families a lot better. The housing's improved a lot, although that's not perfect. But it's gotten a lot better. But I think that's helpful for the families. And again, I always tell soldiers I didn't have to join the Army to know the Army values, because those are that's something my mom and dad taught me. Honor and integrity and personal courage and selfless service. I mean, that's something my parents taught me. I mean, the Army. I joined the Army. I'm like, oh, okay, this is the cool stuff. It's like the golden rule. You don't need to go to church necessarily to know the golden rule. It's like it's part of your upbringing. That just kind of helps make it reinforce it with you. But no, I mean, this is a good interview. I mean, it's great that you all are doing this. I appreciate the opportunity to come here. I know we were talking earlier about that, is recording certain, modern day type events. Maybe 40, 50, 60 years from now, somebody might dig out this tape and, who's this Morrow guy? Who is this guy? Yeah, he likes to blabble on. Okay, yeah, we know that. But no, it is. I mean, and some of the questions you asked me, I mean, it really got my juices flowing up here. And as far as that, and it's good. And it was. Some of those questions, brought back some pretty good memories, or memories that maybe I haven't talked about for a little while. Kind of like the seminar that we did yesterday and stuff with Dr. Glover. It's good to think about it, stuff, and talk about it, because again, this has been. The Army's not my life, because my life is my family, but the Army is a huge part of my life, obviously, and especially when the Army says, "Here, go over here for a long time." I mean, that's a huge part of your life. But yeah, the Army is a great part of my life. It's been really good to me. Like I said, I can't complain. I've gotten almost everything I wanted. Really, I mean, from going to ROTC, going to Germany, being an engineer, I wanted to go to DC and do that cool stuff. I wanted to come to Leonard Wood, although Leonard Wood's not that hard to get. But yeah, I wanted to do that. I wanted to go back to my old battalion, the 94th Engineer Battalion. I was like, wow, I get to go back to my old battalion that I was a lieutenant in. The Army it's been very good to me. But everybody, especially all the folks that have deployed also, and the folks that haven't deployed, folks haven't had deployed for 8 times to say that you've sacrificed. But serving in the Army, whether it's 2, 3, 4 years or 20, 30 years, I mean, you do sacrifice a lot. I mean, you give up a lot. You put a lot into the Army because it does. It takes – the Army asks you to give a lot, but it does give a lot in return for the most part. So it's definitely been a good career move for me, I guess.
Well, Major Morrow, I want to, on behalf of both state and myself, I want to thank you for participating in the Third Cantigny Oral History Project.
Yeah. Thanks, Ty. I appreciate it.
And my family, thank you for your service and your continued service.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ty. So thanks. So, all right. Is that a wrap?
Sit there just for a second. I want to get.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, that's good.
If you want a copy of these, I can email them.
Oh, okay.
You can have them. You can have this copy too. I didn't really.
Oh,
The
yeah.
only thing I took notes on, if you were wondering what I was writing down, whenever you used an acronym, I didn't
Oh, did you?
recognize. I wrote it down so that I can look it up
Okay.
later.
Yeah, usually I try not to use too many acronyms, but it's kind of hard sometimes. It just naturally